Good morning. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Kathleen Hanley. I am the MLA for Calgary Mountain View and the NDP Energy Critic for oil and gas, natural gas, critical minerals, and hydrogen. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered here today on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 7 and acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection and history with this land. The UCP have decided to reintroduce the fuel tax on Albertans on January 1st. While most Albertans are struggling to afford the basics, while provincial coffers fill with oil revenues, the UCP need to pay for their promises to create more cushy board jobs and fill them with their friends at increased salaries. In a province grappling with escalating rents, a housing affordability crisis, high grocery bills, and rising power prices, the UCP are focused not on how to help Alberta families, but on how to help themselves. A recent survey showed that nearly half of Albertans are planning to cut their holiday spending so that they can stretch their limited funds to cover the essentials. The survey suggests that 49% of those residents are using the money for groceries instead, while nearly half say they don't have any additional money to spend. Less than a month ago, Premier Danielle Smith said the economic challenges facing Albertans was a reason to extend the fuel tax exemption. But the financial pressures for many Albertans remain the same today, with many struggling to meet their basic needs, and yet the UCP have decided to reinstate this tax. The real problem is the government's misguided priorities. They reintroduced taxes on Alberta, claiming they need the money. While Albertans are struggling to make ends meet, the UCP have been focused on increasing gift limits for themselves and compensation for their friends that they will appoint to rapidly multiplying board gigs. Inflation is affecting everyone, yet the government's response has been to ease the burden of inflation on themselves rather than on the people that they serve. They were happy to pass legislation that would allow them to get bigger gifts, justifying their decision by, quote, inflationary pressures, end quote. But they are totally unconcerned with the impact of those same inflationary pressures on the bills that Albertans are already struggling to pay. The decision to reinstate the fuel tax reflects a government out of touch with everyday people and their concerns. And what do the UCP need the money for? Well, an increase in salaries at agencies, boards, and commissions. What kind of salaries? As it turns out, directors at the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission make $350,000 a year, or an AESO VP who makes over $400,000 a year. These are the salaries the UCP feel that they need to expand and need to pay for. And it gets worse. The UCP are rapidly expanding the number of these positions, creating boards, appointing their friends to these massive, according to them insufficient, salaries. This is what a normal Conservative government would call bloat. This is what the UCP will pay for by hiking the fuel tax on Alberta families. This is Albertans paying for the UCP's priorities, lavish paying health gigs for their friends while they privatize your health care. Already, the UCP is noodling about rolling back their promised tax bracket changes. The UCP is focused on personal perks, not the struggles of everyday Albertans. Albertans deserve a government that genuinely acts in their best interests, that prioritizes their well-being, and doesn't pass the consequences of their actions on to hardworking families in this province. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
We'll now open up the press conference for questions. For those joining by Zoom, please use the raise hand or *9 function. For those in person, will you please state your name and affiliation? We'll start with questions in person.
Levi with CTV. With the fuel tax resuming, is it now fair for the UCP to solely blame the federal government and its carbon tax for making the province so unaffordable?
Well, I don't think that was actually ever fair. For instance, the UCP have been trying to blame skyrocketing electricity prices on the carbon tax. We know from economists, from the Market Surveillance Administrator, that that's actually economic withholding. So massive profits for energy companies that are allowed under UCP policy that are driving up those prices. In addition, the UCP are bringing back this tax. They're bringing back this tax to pay for their own ideas, for expanded salaries for their friends, for expensive privatization in AHS. I mean, they probably still have to cover the bill for that lab privatization fiasco. So I think, this is a government who's desperate to blame other people for the results of their choices.
Aaron with Live Wire Calgary. How long would you propose a fuel tax pause to continue for?
So what I would say is that right now, Albertans are struggling to pay the rent. They're struggling to pay the bills. We have survey after survey after survey coming out and demonstrating extremely clearly that Albertans continue to struggle with their basic needs. I think as long as that is the case, that should be what the government priority is. So as long as most Albertans are unable to cover their bills.
Several weeks ago talked about phasing back in the fuel tax based on WTI prices. What's the opposition to having a phased-in fuel tax over time as opposed to putting a 13-cent in January?
Well, I don't think we're opposed to the phasing in over time. It's really the focus of the government that we're opposed to. So the government ought to be focused on the fact that the majority of the population is struggling to meet their basic needs. That's what they should be doing with this resource revenue that belongs to all of us. It belongs to every one of us in Alberta, and we should be using that to relieve the burden on families. Instead, the government is focused on, hiking taxes on families so that they can pay for, lavish priorities that they have for their friends, for themselves.
We'll do one more pass for questions. First in person. And on the Zoom. Seeing none, that concludes today's press conference.
Thank you very much.